Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the local community briefing on the new comprehensive draft LEP and DCP for Willoughby Council for Northbridge. My name is Norma Shanky-Williams, and on behalf of Willoughby City Council, I wish to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land on which we stand, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We acknowledge the vital contribution that Indigenous people and cultures have made and still make to the nation that we share, Australia. Now, before we get started with the meeting proper, we're going to show a short video which gives a bit of an overview in terms of the draft LEP and DCP and shows Mayor Tanya Taylor and Dr. Deborah Deering from the GSC talking about the new draft LEP and DCP for Willoughby. Cue the video, thank you.
Willoughby is a wonderful place to live. It is a city of diversity with beautiful landscapes, people, and of course our vibrant CBD.
Willoughby is a very diverse place. It has an important centre at Chatswood. It has some really much loved and very successful local centres.
Our residents really value our beautiful bushlands and of course our urban environment and our CBD.
It has a range of housing, quite a number of apartments, and also a lot of lower density areas. It has important heritage precincts.
Willoughby City Council is committed to delivering a city that is green, livable, inclusive, connected, prosperous and vibrant. Over the last 5 years, we've engaged with the community to help us develop the local environment plan.
The Local Environment Plan, commonly called the LEP, is the planning instrument which actually sets the framework for future development.
In 2012, we created the Local Environment Plan to help us plan and decide what is built and where in Willoughby.
That's been proposed for change, significant changes. For example, in Chatswood, it is an important commercial place for the whole of the district, and even within Sydney, it has a key role. We want to make sure that's facilitated and expanded into the future. But it's hoped and anticipated that Chatswood will grow to be an even more important commercial centre than it isn't at this point in time. You will see in the LEP some major changes to the heights for commercial buildings and also the introduction of more apartment buildings close to the services around the Chatswood CBD.
It also covers affordable housing, environmental issues and bushfire hazards. The Local Environment Plan outlines subdivision sizes, heights of buildings and the amount of floor space area on which you can build. The plan allocates land for specific purposes through zoning and sets standards for development. It aims to provide jobs and housing growth, more medium and high density living, as well as strengthening the character of our CBD. It will help us design our homes for the future. It helps us guide conservation of cultural heritage as well as protect environmentally sensitive land. It helps us create a better place to live with more trees and connected pathways and cycleways.
We also want to link one green space to the other green space so that it's not just isolated green spaces and recreation opportunities, but they can be a network where they can be readily reached by foot, not needing to take a car. They're opportunities that we need to try to grow into the future. While COVID has thrown up some uncertainty about the pace of change, we do know that cities do grow. Willoughby is a very desirable place in the Greater Sydney area. Sydney is a very desirable city. It will grow into the future.
The plan helps us to set our strategic vision for the future.
Being prepared is important and planning ahead is crucial.
So I trust you found that of use and interest. It gives a nice flavour, I think, of what we're trying to do in the draft LEP and DCP with this exhibition and the proposals that they contain. So in terms of the webinar this evening, I'll be, as I said, my name's Norma Shanky-Williams. I'll be presenting the first part of the slide deck, followed by Nicola Grosskops from our North Sydney Local Health District. And after that, Ian Arnott will be presenting with Jane Gibson. Jane will talk about the Northbridge specific elements of the webinar, and Ian will talk about more general elements of the LEP and DCP. There will be common slides you'll see in this webinar. If you've seen other webinars, you'll notice that they are common to all webinars. We want to give a good, consistent message across all of the webinars that we're delivering. And the message that we deliver from the North Sydney Local Health District, I think, is a very important one about healthy built environments and the importance of health in the planning that we do, that community health is one of our key objectives. I'd like to welcome the Mayor, Tanya Taylor, tonight, who's also attending the webinar. We have about 112, I think, dialing in on the webinar tonight, and we have some presence in the chamber too, which is good to see. So we're very pleased to have both people in person as well as tuning in. Questions can be submitted at any time in the Q&A function of the Zoom that you're on, and staff will respond to these tonight if they're straightforward questions, but if not, we'll try and provide answers within the next 10 working days. And we'll take some verbal questions at the end. We'll try and finish about 7:15 and give some time for questions at the end of the presentation. Any feedback or comments that are not specifically questions, if you can put those in the chat area of the Zoom, that would be very helpful. And of course, microphones and cameras are switched off to reduce the background noise. The webinar is being recorded, so that's something to bear in mind if you want to actually, that's mostly for somebody who's in the chamber, so that's not particularly relevant for those of you actually tuning in on the webinar tonight. So the agenda will provide you a bit of a strategic planning background. I'll talk through that this evening, and some key changes to zoning that are proposed by the state government. We'll then move on to the local health district presentation about creating a healthy built environment in Willoughby. And I hope you'll find that very informative. I'm sure you will. Then we will look at the Northbridge specific elements of the draft LEP and DCP. So Jane will talk us through those. And then Ian will talk through some more general aspects of the LEP and DCP for Northbridge and the area around Northbridge. And then we'll have time, we believe, for questions, hoping to finish at 7:30 promptly. So some of the headline changes that this LEP is proposing are about growing Chatswood CBD into the future, to the north and south along the railway corridor, in line with the CBD strategy that many of you will be familiar with already. This has been adopted by council and having been publicly exhibited. So that's one of the key headline changes for us in this new LEP and DCP. We're also looking at increasing density in our local centres in line with the local centre strategy. And one of those centres, of course, is Northbridge. And that's also been adopted by council and informing the work we've done on the LEP and DCP. We're looking at introducing more height and density in our industrial areas in line with our industrial land strategy. And that's about trying to incentivise better use of our industrial areas and try and increase the innovation and the good use of those areas, because they're very important to the sustainability of the city going forward. Also, we've introduced a new design excellence requirement. We want to increase our affordable housing contribution from 4% to 10% and manage the very important urban heat impacts that we experience as the climate changes and warms up. And that's a very important element, we believe, of the new LEP and DCP. We're aligning our residential controls, and Ian will talk about this in more detail, with the code set for exempt and complying, to try, in the interest of equity, make sure that the system is fairer and also more easy to navigate for anybody proposing to do changes or alterations and additions to homes. We're also suggesting the inclusion of landscaping controls taken from our development control plan and moving those to our LEP to give them more statutory strength, because we believe landscaping controls are critical, not only to mitigate the impacts of the changing climate and urban heat, but also to improve biodiversity and improve character, maintain character indeed of Willoughby. The development control plan will also see a strengthening of heritage controls, and there'll be a reduction in the parking requirement, we're proposing particularly around railway precincts, where there's already good opportunities for public transport. And the exhibition period will be for 12 weeks. We're already, as I say, about halfway through the webinar presentations. So we'll be going until the early part of June for this exhibition period. And hopefully that will give enough people to get time to deliver submissions and be aware of what the changes are as fully as possible, because it's a very complicated system, our planning system. So the process for the new council initiated comprehensive LEP is not out of the blue. We haven't drawn this LEP from nowhere, the draft LEP. We've based it on specific strategies prepared to guide the future LEP in terms of our local centres, our Chatswood CBD, our housing strategy, our industrial land strategy, our affordable housing and integrated transport strategies, and work that the state's done on St Leonard's and Crow's Nest that came from the North District Plan. And indeed, the North District Plan is a guide to all councils in the North District for their LEPs. Part and parcel with that was the requirement that all councils prepared a local strategic planning statement, and we did our local strategic planning statement, and it was adopted by council in February 2020. And that sets the agenda for a new LEP to align our controls and provisions with the North District Plan, with the relevant district plan. So we prepared our draft LEP based on all this foregoing good strategic planning work and the LSPS, and formed the planning proposal, as it's called, to submit for acceptance to state government to go on exhibition. The local planning panel gave their advice and supported it. It was reported to council and they supported it and referred to the Department of Planning for what's called a gateway determination. And this was granted, which allows us to go on exhibition with these draft documents and seek submissions from the local community. So that's where we're at. There were the requirements applied to that gateway that have been fulfilled. And now we're on exhibition for, as I say, the 12-week period. That's where we're at. So the current LEP is the 2012 LEP, which many of you might have used during work. You might have submitted DAs to council or had occasion to make submissions on DAs next door or nearby. Work commenced on that LEP in 2006, so it took about 4 or 5 years to get it on exhibition to 2010, same as now really. It was also re-exhibited in 2012 because there were significant changes from that first exhibition, and finally came into force in 2013. So it's now 9 years old, and it's already had 22 amendments since gazettal. So refreshment of that LEP is certainly due, not only because of its age, but because of its the fact that we now need to reflect the new strategic agenda from the Greater Sydney Commission in terms of the North District Plan and the Metropolitan Region Plan. In our LSPS, which I said was adopted by council in 2020, we have followed the issue of the district plans and reflected what the district plan objectives have been in setting our 20-year vision for priorities and actions across the entire LGA. It's that now the comprehensive LEP will give statutory effect to that LSPS by providing actions and provisions to implement planning controls that provide controls to achieve outcomes for housing, transport, heritage, health and livability, economy and employment, all those things, climate change, biodiversity, resilience. It's a very wide agenda in the LSPS. It's very comprehensive. And the extent to which we can reflect the need to improve on all those elements of our 20-year statutory vision in the LEP and DCP has been quite a challenge. So we're asking for submissions to suggest where we might improve on that, where we might have overlooked something or not gone as far as people would like us to see us go. So this is one of the main reasons for the exhibition of these documents. Have we really genuinely delivered on the hope and the promise of the LSPS in the draft LEP and DCP? We believe we have, but there could be more still to be done. So the basis of the new LEP, as I say, the new draft LEP, is drawn from the conclusions and recommendations of those existing strategies. Our local centre strategy, the Chatswood CBD strategy, all the covers that you see there as the work that's been completed in the last 4 or 5 years. And will assist in responding also to the new LEP, will assist in responding also to the new Resilient Willoughby strategy and action plan, because resilience is a very important element of a future community. And the basis of the new draft LEP in terms of resilience is looking at trying to deliver resilient places to withstand climate change, which we all know is upon us already, to sustain biodiversity and support vibrant, connected communities. So the provisions that we've put in the draft LEP, do they do this? We believe they have made a very good fist of it, but we want to hear submissions about whether we've achieved it sufficiently or not. And resilient buildings, which is safe, well-designed, affordable and sustainable. So are our controls and provisions going to do that, do you believe, in our new draft LEP and DCP? We hope we've done a good job of it, but we want to hear from you as to whether you agree. Some key statistics to bear in mind for future planning in Willoughby in terms of population growth. You heard Dr. Deborah Deering talk about COVID having an impact on growth, but growth will not stop. And our population is expected to grow from 78,000 back in 2016 by about 14,000 people to almost 92,000 by 2036, which is our planning horizon date. We're expecting the number of dwellings to increase by over 6,700 over that same time period. We had a 5-year dwelling target in the district plan of 1,250 for a 5-year period, and we've actually met that target. So we're planning for the full 2036 target, so we know what the full agenda is for us in terms of housing delivery. And we've based our local housing strategy on that, that delivery of 6,700 homes to 2036. The number of jobs in Willoughby City is expected to grow from 64,000 to 74,000. We have a jobs target for Chatswood, which we're very keen to see delivered from 6,300 to 8,300 new jobs. And that's set in the North District plan. So that's why we're very keen on growing the commercial core of Chatswood to make sure that we don't fall short of that employment target set in the district plan. We believe that's very important for the future vitality of Chatswood. In addition to the work that we've been doing locally in terms of strategic planning, there's also been a lot of work done by the state government in terms of changes to the planning system, not least of which is some changes to zones. These changes to environmental zones, changing them to C zones or conservation zones, this has already happened and has been placed in the LEP already. So all the E zones that we formerly knew, like national parks and environmental conservation zones, are now known as C zones, but largely that's the main, it's been a cosmetic change really in terms of name. There's also currently going on a change to employment IN and B zones, IN being industry and B business zones, which is concurrent with the work we're doing on the LEP just to make our lives even more interesting. So that's also on exhibition at the moment with the council's draft LEP to show how we're changing, the state government has decided to reduce the number of zones and collapse some zones into new zones. So for example, our neighbourhood and local centre zones become an E1 local centre zone. And then that's something that we're also seeking your review of and your comments on. Largely, we're comfortable with what's being proposed, but there may be some nuances that we want to settle and discuss more. I think something is a way of describing the status of that change to employment zones. Now I'm going to hand over to Nicola Grosskops, who's going to talk to us about the importance of a healthy built environment in Willoughby.
Thanks very much, Norma. Good evening and thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Nicola Grosskops and I'm a public health professional from the Healthy Built Environments team at Northern Sydney Local Health District. Northern Sydney LHD is a part of New South Wales Health and we work across the 9 local government areas in Sydney's north, one of which is Willoughby City Council. The Healthy Built Environments program exists to help improve people's health and wellbeing in Northern Sydney by creating healthier environments, ones which support people to be healthy as part of everyday living. The broad banner under which we operate, known as population health, focuses on the conditions that enable people and our communities at a population level to remain healthy and out of hospital. So as we meet here tonight to discuss 2 important documents that will shape Willoughby and the lives of those who live and work here for many years to come, I thank Council for inviting us to talk about the important connection between the built environment and our health. Now, by way of background, when I refer to the built environment, what I mean is the human-made spaces in which we live, work and play on a daily basis. So our homes, buildings, streets, sidewalks, transport corridors and so on. So in short, in this presentation, I'm going to provide you with an overview of the connection between the built environment and our health. in order to set the context for tonight's webinar and discussion about the draft Willoughby LEP and DCP. So 2 questions for you to think about now, and as we move through the presentation tonight. And the first one's quite simple, but what makes you feel healthy? And feel free to put it into the chat. Is it some form of physical activity? Is it healthy eating? Or is it time spent socialising with family and friends? Is it connecting with nature or your spirituality? Or is it a combination of all these things? And secondly, how does the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your health and well-being, both positively and negatively? Well, what we know is that all built environments are not created equal. And the environments in which we live have a profound impact on both our physical and our mental well-being and health. Healthy built environments support positive health outcomes by making healthy, active lifestyle choices the easier choice. So an excellent resource that summarises the many ways in which the built environment interacts with our health is the New South Wales Healthy Built Environment Checklist, which is up on the screen there. This checklist is based on 11 key themes covering healthy eating, physical activity, housing, transport and connectivity, quality employment, community safety and security, open space and natural features, social interaction, social connection and connectivity, and the environment and health, and finally, environmental sustainability and climate change. Now, what ties all these themes together is the concept of healthy neighbourhood design. And healthy neighbourhood design is facilitated by land use and development decisions, as informed by documents like the LEP and the DCP that we're talking about tonight. They prioritise complete, compact and connected communities. Communities that reflect these 3 qualities: support both recreational and physical activity along safe, well-connected, tree-lined streets and paths. They also facilitate planned and incidental social interaction, as people have greater opportunities to meet easily and accessible destinations like shops and centres in the local area and areas of green open space. Healthy neighbourhood design also supports business activity and a strong local economy, and they connect people with key services such as public transport when they do need to travel beyond their neighbourhood for work or leisure. This diagram on this slide just captures these features of a healthy built environment and a healthy neighbourhood. So here you can see a neighbourhood designed around a connected and walkable street network linking to key destinations that are also co-located, importantly. So for example, a primary school positioned next to a community centre or a library, as well as nearby retail. And what this does is it reduces the reliance on the motor vehicle for short trips, which in turn then reduces local traffic congestion and promotes healthier and more sustainable forms of transport like walking and cycling. It encourages people to spend time and builds a stronger sense of community and place. So there you have an example of how zoning and development controls can facilitate complete, compact and connected communities, and the ways in which these communities promote our physical and mental health by encouraging physical activity, opportunities for social connection, and access to healthy food at local shops. Now, a central focus of the draft Willoughby LEP and DCP is housing, as Norma has already alluded to. And from a health perspective, the research evidence is quite clear that the healthiest neighbourhoods are typically characterised by a diversity of housing types, with more compact housing, such as apartments and townhouses located in and near centres, such as examples seen here and in many areas of Willoughby City Council, such as in around Chatswood CBD. And the word density can sometimes concern people, but what we know is that higher density housing that is well designed and well located has an important role to play in accommodating future population growth and providing people with more affordable housing options. We know that housing is a fundamental health need, and a diversity of housing types contributes to a diverse community, one in which people of all ages can live and grow over time. Thankfully, through appropriate zoning and best practice development controls, much of our high density housing is setting a new benchmark for design by incorporating things like green roofs and walls, as well as measures to activate the streetscapes and minimise potential negative outcomes such as overshadowing of public space. But with all this said, as our city becomes more compact, we do have to invest in not just the quantity, but the quality of our public domain, which includes open space. So access to quality open space within walking distance to where people live and work is associated with a range of positive health outcomes. For example, time spent in green space reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, premature death, preterm birth, stress, and high blood pressure. And of course, green and natural vegetation contributes to a healthy planet. And this leads me to the final theme of this presentation this evening, which is environmental sustainability and climate change. These interrelated themes are both major public health issues, and we can design our neighbourhoods in ways which protect our valuable natural habitats. We can use natural tree shade, design quality built shade to mitigate urban heat, and future-proof our communities against natural hazards and disasters like the terrible flooding we've just had in Sydney, bushfires and heat waves. In 2020, interestingly, more people died from heat than car accidents, and heat-related death in New South Wales accounts for more deaths than all other natural disasters combined. Some of our most vulnerable people in our society, the elderly, children, people suffering from chronic disease, are at the most risk of heat-related illness and death. So it is something that we need to be considering now into the future. So I hope this presentation has given you some insight into how our environment shapes our lifestyles and therefore our health and well-being. The Healthy Good Environment Checklist resource on the slide there is available at the New South Wales Ministry of Health website if you're interested. But finally, I'll leave you with those two questions that we had at the beginning. What makes you feel healthy? But more importantly, now knowing what you do, how will the neighbourhood that you live in contribute to your community's health and well-being over the next 15 to 20 years? Thank you.
That's great, Nicola. Thank you so much. And I'm sure people listening tonight will have got great inspiration from that, knowing that this is underpinning the work we're trying to do in the LEP and DCP, that community health is so vitally important, and knowing that we have to mitigate the effects of a changing climate into the future. Before I hand over now to Jane Gibson, who's going to talk about the more detailed aspects of the LEP and DCP for Northbridge, I'd just like to welcome Councillor Hugh Erickson, who I believe has been able to join us this evening, which is great. Thanks, Councillor Erickson. I'll hand over to Jane.
Thank you, Norma and Nicola. Good evening. My name is Jane Gibson, and I'm a strategic planner here at Willoughby Council. During this segment of the webinar, I will be talking about the changes proposed for Northbridge. Planning controls included in the draft local environmental plan are derived from the local centre strategy, which was finalised in June 2020. Some of you may recall the previous exhibition for the local centre strategy. The image of that document you can see on the screen now. In the strategy, it identified a vision for Northbridge being that Northbridge Town Centre is a successful commercial hub, providing a mix of local and destination shopping, as well as offices and services, in an attractive and accessible setting. Its built form and character and range of extensive public open spaces has ensured its role as a much valued community hub. New commercial floor space has created local business opportunities, and new medium density housing has responded to the needs of residents at all stages of life. The strategy also included draft recommendations for growth in Northbridge, including specifics for how the LEP and DCP could be amended in terms of height and scale. What we are doing now is translating the recommendations from the local centre strategy to make them specific controls in the LEP and DCP. You can see from this slide the extent of the area that was covered in the local centres study. The image is looking eastwards along Sailors Bay Road, with the blue coloured area in the centre being the commercial properties along Sailors Bay Road between Eastern Valley Way and Harden Avenue. The car park to the rear of Northbridge Plaza is to the left of the image. I'll now look at the specific areas and sites that have proposed changes included in the draft LEP. The main changes I will be highlighting are the increases to the height of buildings and floor space ratio, which I will refer to as FSR. Anyone not familiar with that term, the floor space ratio is a density measure derived from the gross floor area on all levels of a building divided by the site area. The first area is the commercial section along Sailors Bay Road between Eastern Valley Way and Harden Avenue. It includes the Northbridge Plaza, which is in the top image. You can see on the slide, and also the remaining commercial properties up to Harden Avenue, which is shown in the right-hand picture. The proposal along here is to increase the height up to 6 stories, which equates to 20 metres, and an increase in FSR from 2:1 to 2.5:1. Currently, the height limit is 14 metres, which is about 4 stories. The next area is along Eastern Valley Way, being numbers 7 to 19, including the car park to the rear of the plaza. The photograph on the top left shows the existing vehicle entrance to the car park from Eastern Valley Way. A change to zoning is proposed here to R4 high density, with an increase of height presenting at 16 metres, which is 5 stories, facing Eastern Valley Way, dropping down to 9 metres, which is 3 stories at the rear, which would back onto the proposed open space area. FSR is proposed to increase from various existing controls, which range currently from 0.5:1, 0.7:1, to proposed 2.5:1. Looking at the image on the right, you can see the central area of the proposed public open space, which would sit above basement parking. Also to the right-hand side of the image, you can see red-coloured rectangles around the open space area, which depict medium density housing, which is an R3 zoning proposed along the remaining perimeter, along the northern and eastern sections of what was currently the existing car park. The 9 metre height limit remains as it is now, and the FSR would be proposed to change from the existing 0.5:1 and 0.7:1 to a 0.9:1. I'll return later to Council's car park in a slide to discuss reclassification. The next section is along Sailors Bay, proposed zoning change to Sailors Bay Road and Baringa Road. Starting with Sailors Bay Road, this proposed change relates to the residential properties at the south side of Sailors Bay Road, facing the plaza between Nulgara Street and Strathallan Avenue. This picture is taken as if you were standing in the corner of Eastern Valley Way looking eastwards along Sailors Bay Road. Already this section has an existing medium density R3 zoning, and the height is proposed to be changed from 9 metres, which is 3 stories, to 12 metres, which is 4 stories. An increase in FSR from 0.7 to 1 to 1 to 1 is also proposed. A 6-metre deep soil landscape setback will also be required along this section of Sailors Bay Road. Baringa Road. From Baringa Road, there is a proposed zoning change from R2 low density to R3 medium density, affecting the properties on the northern section of Baringa Road. The top image shows Baringa Road from Nulgara Street, and the lower picture shows Baringa from the opposite side entering from Strathallan Avenue. For Baringa, the proposed changes are from a height of 8.5 metres, which is 2 stories, to 9 metres, which is 3 stories, and a variable FSR change to 1 to 1. New development along this section would require to be amalgamated to achieve a minimum lot size of 1,100 square metres and a minimum frontage of 27 metres. (57 to 69) Strathallan Avenue. This section is located on the eastern side of Strathallan Avenue between Sailors Bay Road and Baringa Road. The proposal here is to increase the height from 14 metres to 17 metres. That is an extra story, from 4 to 5 stories. In this section of Sailors Bay Road, the top image, we're looking at the street view of 134 to 160 Sailors Bay Road, which is on the southern side near the corner of Strathallan. And the lower image is 159 to 177 Sailors Bay Road, which is on the northern side near the corner of Willoughby Street. This part of Sailors Bay Road has a current height limit of 14 metres, which is 4 stories. These properties are on the south and the northern side are being offered an increase to 5 stories if 2 levels of commercial are guaranteed at ground and first floor. Going back to the car park at Northbridge Plaza, I'd like to talk about the reclassification of land there. If any of the changes are to happen at the car park, we need to go through a reclassification process. All council-owned land must be classified as either community land or operational land. How public land is classified determines the ease or difficulty a council can have dealings in public land, including its sale, leasing or licensing. It also provides for transparency in council's strategic asset management or disposal of public land. Community land must not be sold, exchanged, or otherwise disposed of by a council. It can be leased, but there are restrictions on the grant of leases and licenses, and also on the way community land can be used. For operational land, there are no specific restrictions on council's powers to manage, develop, dispose, or change the nature and use. In addition, this site has a restrictive covenant which prevents the land to be used for any other purpose other than a public car park and baby health centre. So what does all that mean? It means if we reclassify the land to operational, it can be rezoned to enable the undergrounding of the Northbridge car park with the new open space and commercial, retail and residential development above. The gains from uplift and zoning will be applied to the provision and maintenance of the new minimum area of 2,000 square metres of open space and a village square arrangement as proposed in the local centre strategy. Now, depending on the outcome of submissions for this current exhibition, Council intends to hold a public hearing on the proposed reclassification, which would be chaired by an independent assessor. The hearing would take place around about August time. This will give us a time to bring together any submissions on the proposed classification and pass them on to the independent assessor to hold the public hearing. Members of the public can attend this and make a verbal presentation if they wish. Subsequently, the independent assessor will make a recommendation to council being whether to proceed with the reclassification or not. Affordable housing. As Norma mentioned earlier, Willoughby has an affordable housing policy. Any areas which receive an uplift in residential capacity through an LEP are required at DA stage, development application stage, to provide a percentage of floor space as affordable housing. The affordable housing is dedicated to council in perpetuity. For the sites I've been just discussing, if the new increases to zoning, height and FSR go ahead, 10% of the residential floor area will require to be dedicated as affordable housing. Other changes that are coming into our LEP that will affect Northbridge. Our current LEP includes a design excellence clause to achieve best design outcomes. The clause applies only to specific sites as of now. The draft LEP intends that the clause will apply to Northbridge Local Centre as well as other local centres in the Willoughby local government area. Now that means that development applications for buildings over 12 metres will be subject to Design Excellence Review Panel. Other LEP changes that we're looking into, we're looking at removing any anomalies that exist. We're including a new urban heat clause, which will ensure new development incorporates effective design to reduce and remove urban heat from the environment. We're looking to remove any obsolete clauses. We've got some site-specific clauses where development's taking place and it's completed, so they'll be removed. And we'll also update the status of any state and local land acquisitions. An example of an anomaly, although this slide, although the picture's not in Northbridge, gives an example of a correction that we intend to update. It shows how the shading, the brown colour on a heritage item needs to be updated to include the property building. You'll see in the picture, the building just comes underneath the brown area. So that was a quick overview to give you an idea of the specific site changes in Northbridge. I encourage you to look at the planning proposal and make comments on Have Your Say Willoughby. If you live in a low density area in the Northbridge area, which isn't subject to these controls, you'll be interested in the next section of the webinar. And I'm now going to pass you on to Ian Arnott, who will discuss the changes in those areas.
Thanks very much, Jane, and thanks everyone for tuning in tonight. Ian Arnott's my name, and I'm primarily going to be looking at the housing component of, or housing changes within the LEP and DCP. So as was mentioned, we're charged with a requirement of trying to deliver for the growing population in the order of 6,700 new dwellings. And the housing strategy that was adopted by Council in 2020 identified three main focus areas for the provision of that housing. Those are generally in locations, as Nicola referred to, that are accessible and close to services, close to public transport to reduce the need for car usage. And so around the CBD, the Chatswood CBD, is where the bulk of those additional housing will be provided, being right on the Metro and North Shore Line railway interchange, and with the services that Chatswood provide. But it is also some housing uplift proposed through our local centres, Northbridge being one, and that's, as Jane was speaking just then, about the changes proposed within the Northbridge local centre, and a further area, a focus area for how increasing housing density is through our R3 and R4 zones, our existing residential flat zones, to provide for those 6,700 new dwellings. And in addition to those areas being the most accessible and the most with public transport options and accessible to services and retail, etc., it's also to help preserve the diversity of housing and the character of our low density residential areas. Much of the Willoughby LGA is characterised by gardens suburbs, and we don't want a sprawl of residential flat into those areas so much. We want to try and maintain that character and the those housing opportunities as well. So just in terms of the LEP changes regarding housing, the main, I'll just run through some of those main changes. So at the moment, there's a floor space ratio control, which Shane referred to as the ratio of the floor space to the site area. In line with the state policy for exempt and complying development, we're looking to make that a gross floor area control and to align with the state policy, primarily to provide equity that someone that can do a development without reference to council through the private certification system as complying development on one site, if they achieve all the ticker box requirements, can go ahead and build a development at a significantly greater scale than our current controls would allow if there was one element that they couldn't comply with and so were forced through the development application pathway. However, there is one component that of the state policy that we're not in agreement with, or in agreement for the purposes of our local government area in adopting within the local environmental plan, and that is the landscaping control. As I said, we see the character of our suburbs as the landscape contribution that they provide as significant in that character provision, and also significant in addressing improved tree canopy opportunity for landscape and addressing the urban heat effects. We're also similarly looking to amend the dual occupancy provisions to align with the code SEP as well. And again, with the exception of landscaping. We're looking at the form of housing called manor housing or manor houses, which the state government has also brought in through the code SEP as being possible on sites of 600 square metres if the council's own local environmental plan doesn't have a control of a higher standard for the minimum lot size. We're looking at increasing that to 1,100 square metres, being consistent with other forms of residential flat development in our area. Primary reason for that is that we see that the manor house form in residential flat zones is not providing the maximum opportunity of addressing that housing increase in housing provision. It's enabling a site by site, which often brings with it issues of privacy through buildings looking into each other downside boundaries. As has also been mentioned, we're looking at increasing the provision of affordable housing requirement. So just to quickly give a couple of examples here of the types of development that have been approved to date under complying development, a couple of examples there on the left, and those that have been approved under development applications. And you can see that certainly from a streetscape perspective, the scale of, or the presentation to the street is not dissimilar between each other. So moving to the change in what the actual control is, the table on the left is the current Willoughby local environmental control, and the table on the right is the complying development control, which is what we're a gross floor area control, which we're looking to adopt into the LEP. If I take you to the site area line in the left-hand table that reads 301 to 400, you can see that for a site area of 400 square metres, the amount of achievable gross floor area is 200 square metres. Whereas if you go down to the next line, if you have a site area of 401 square metres, the amount of floor space that you can achieve drops down to 188.5. It doesn't increase consistently or continuously with an increase in site area, whereas using the gross floor area control, as is shown in the right-hand table, enables that to occur. And this is the comparison of landscaping controls. You can see that our current development control plan provisions, which is where our landscaping control is currently located, are in the table on the right. And that's what we're proposing to transfer into the local environmental plan. Not a lot of councils have done this, and I don't know of any that have done it in the exact way that we're doing it. But we do see the importance of strengthening our controls around landscaping to provide greater, the local environmental plan being a stronger instrument than the supportive development control plan, which is viewed more as a guideline. If you look at the table on the right-hand side, it shows the existing complying development controls, and you can see in all instances our current development control plan control for landscaping is greater than that under the complying development set. So I'll just run through an example here of a development that has been approved under the complying development code, and for a site area of 650 square metres. Under the local environmental plan, that would have allowed a maximum floor space of 279 square metres. Under the code SEP, 335 square metres. In this instance, 312 square metres was proposed and approved. In terms of landscaping, our current controls and what we propose to have in the local environmental plan would require 266 square metres of landscaping, whereas under the code SEP only 195 square metres would be required. In this instance, 255 was actually provided, being fairly close to what our current requirements are. So you can see that there is quite a significant increase in floor space that we're proposing from our current controls, but at the same time trying to retain and strengthen our landscaping provision. And we've done some testing of this to show that that increase in floor space with the landscaping provision is achievable generally. And that, of course, if you're trying to retain the landscaping provision but allow more floor space, is likely to result in more two-storey form or more development at the upper levels. However, that is something that can be done already under the code SEP. So we're not doing something that an owner of a site cannot already do within the R2 low-density residential zones, albeit out of heritage conservation areas. I'll move on to dual occupancy, and I'll just run through these images. So the top left-hand image is a dual occupancy known as attached side by side. The top right being attached, one above the other. The bottom left being detached, both with a street frontage, this one being on a corner site, and the bottom right being detached in a battle axe formation. The Code SEP brought into effect dual occupancy as being a permissible form to be done under the Code SEP. So again, without reference to council, and potentially without reference to council through private certification. It doesn't preclude the ability for someone to apply to council for a complying development certificate. But under those changes that were brought in last year, the top two and the bottom left-hand forms of dual occupancy are all forms that can be done under the Code SEP. However, the bottom right-hand image, the battle axe formation, is not permitted under the Code SEP. And we're also proposing to exclude that form of dual occupancy provision under our new draft LEP. As you can see in that image, it generally results, the battle axe form results in development in the backyard zone generally. It results in a loss of opportunity for a backyard where landscaping and canopy tree planting can be provided. And it also results in a greater intrusion to neighbouring properties through outlook from those properties, through bulk, through potentially overshadowing and overlooking, an impost on those backyard areas, the private open space areas. So similarly to the Code SEP, we're looking at excluding that form of dual occupancy. Where we, as I mentioned, are looking to align with the Code SEP in terms of floor space, and the top two lines there are showing that those floor space provision. However, what we're proposing to do is to adopt the landscape control into the LEP that we are applying to dwelling houses. As dual occupancy are permissible in the same areas that for low density dwelling houses, single dwelling houses, we see that that character by retention of the landscaping provision is an important thing to provide for. And so we're applying the same control that would apply to a dwelling house to the dual occupancy provisions as well. Under the current LEP, subdivision is not permissible until 5 years after the dual occupancy is completed. However, under the Code SEP, someone can immediately subdivide. Again, for reasons of equity, we see the aligning with that. So just to be clear on what those, what the difference is, and maybe I didn't go into that earlier to quite enough extent, is that a Code SEP application is enables no merit assessment. It is purely that if you satisfy the numeric requirements, then you can get the approval to proceed. There is no merit assessment involved in a complying development certificate application. With a development, so if one small component doesn't satisfy one of those provisions, then it requires a development application. Enabling a development application where most of the controls align enables us to generally or primarily focus on that area of non-compliance with the code requirements. And as I've said, we see provide a greater level of equity. So just an example of dual occupancy, this one being a site area of 730 square metres. Under our current and our proposed controls, 700 square metres is the minimum lot size for attached dual occupancy, 900 for detached dual occupancy. In this example, the LEP and current LEP enables a maximum of 292 square metres. That's what was proposed and approved. The complying SEP and our proposed draft LEP aligning with that SEP enables a maximum of 482 square metres, so a significantly greater floor space ratio. You can see that's much greater than is currently achievable under our current LEP, but is currently achievable on these sites under the code SEP. Someone that owned a site in the R2 zone that wasn't in a heritage conservation area could apply for a dual occupancy under the code SEP at that floor space ratio. The landscaped area under our current control would be 255 square metres, 311 square metres was provided in this instance. So our current control says 35% of site area for dual occupancy. Under this code SEP, 265 square metres would be required. So you can see that's actually greater than our current control requires. However, we're saying that we want to align the dual occupancy landscape provision with our dwelling house landscape provision, and so requiring greater again, 308 square metres. And again, we've done some testing around this. Just want to move on to manor houses very quickly, and I mentioned it before that we're looking at increasing the minimum lot size to 1,100 square metres so as not to, if you like, undercook our residential flat zones. And affordable housing, our current control is 4%, where there's an uplift in floor space in residential flat development. Under our local strategic planning statement, we said that we committed to increasing it to 7% by 2021 and 10% by 2026. It takes quite a while, as can be seen, to bring a local environmental plan into place. So as we're past that date of 2021, we're jumping straight to the 10%. And that's what's proposed under the draft LEP. Just to make it clear, the current 4% is in addition to the permissible floor space, and we're proposing the 10% to be included in the permissible floor space under the draft LEP. The reason for that being that the floor space controls have generally been determined based on what is considered to be an acceptable bulk and scale of development for the areas, and to add additional floor space on that is changing that scale of development. So we see the appropriateness of putting the affordable housing provision within the permissible floor space rather than on top of. We've had feasibility report done in respect to the 10% affordable housing, and that undertaken by SGS Planning and Economics, and that is available with the exhibition for consideration as well. In terms of the development control plan, the changes we're doing are generally trying to make it an easier to read document and easier to work through. It's a very large document, and the development control plan being the supporting document with the more detailed controls in it, supporting the local environmental plan. There are 12 parts to the new DCP, and it's intended that that for the area, for the type of development you're wanting to undertake, it directs you to, you can find most of the controls in one section. It does require some other sections to be taken into account, but generally it tries to direct you to on the basis of the type of development you're undertaking. So as I said, seeking to be more user-friendly. For residential, Part B is the primary component. Part C also covers the environmental living zones, those previously referred to as E4 and now referred to as C4. Under the Part B, it divides it into minor and major development. So as I've said, the R2 controls aligning with the complying SEP with the exception of landscaping. The C4 zone has some additional requirements for documentation for those areas adjoining bushland or potential areas of potential heritage, Aboriginal heritage significance. And again, the landscape controls contained within the LEP. For heritage conservation, we're looking at providing more clarification on what needs to be provided to justify demolition of buildings that are contributing to the heritage significance of an area. Obviously, something that we don't want to see happen. However, if you believe that it is justified, then we're saying the sorts of documentation, such as structural engineers' reports, to be submitted to justify your position. We've also incorporated controls around semi-detached development, something that was lacking for our heritage conservation provisions to this point, up until this point. And it's providing additional wording around ensuring the protection of the external fabric and streetscape character. And for our residential flat zones and shop top housing, we're aligning more with the apartment design guide, the state government document around residential flat development. And when not inconsistent, the existing controls would generally remain. We're also looking at incorporating deep soil controls. So for if you've got a development within the local centre, looking at commercial component and potentially with shop top housing, Part B and Part D would be where you'd go to. Part C in there would only be if you're looking at straight residential. You would go within the environmental living zone. You would also go to Part L, which is the place-based controls. And so for the Northbridge Centre, there are the specific controls based on the strategy that that Jane referred to in her presentation. Other parts of the DCP that you would need may need to refer to are the Part F, transport and parking management, vegetation management, which has had changes fairly recently and only minimal further changes. Water management, again, fairly recently changed back in 2019, and only minor changes to clarify provisions. Building sustainability, which has no further changes, but was adopted in 2020. Just in terms of transport and parking management, it is looking at a travel demand management approach, which is really saying that where you are located on good public transport, try and minimise car parking provision to minimise car ownership. So now I think we're over to questions. We'll take some from the floor, if Kate has any, and also try and answer some of those that have come up on the chat, on the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. So Tanya, you've been monitoring some of the questions coming in tonight, I think. So are you able to maybe provide us with some of the questions that people would like to hear some answers to?
Thanks, Norma. The first question is, what is the expected time frame for rezoning and following development of the northern side of Baringa Road?
What is the expected time frame for development?
Rezoning and following development.
So in terms of the draft LEP for rezoning of the northern side of Baringa Road, where we'll be, as you know, this exhibition goes through the 7th of June. We're hoping to report back to Council by around October. That's our aim. It depends on what changes come out of the submissions we receive as to whether we can progress and proceed with the LEP through to being made, or whether we'll need to go back on further exhibition. This is a first round of exhibition, as you saw with the 2012 LEP that went through a number of periods of exhibition, and it is quite likely that that may be needed in this instance as well, which will mean the LEP is unlikely to be finalised before about the middle of next year, or perhaps the second half of next year. That would provide, if the northern side of Bringa Road aspect of the LEP progressed, that would be the time frame potentially for that rezoning. In terms of development, that would depend entirely on whether it was taken up, whether landowners in that area and or developers wish to proceed on the basis of the LEP changes.
Much as we'd like to give more definitive timeframes to these things, it's very difficult to do that because, as Ian has outlined, there are certain unknowns at this stage in the process, and moreover, we don't actually have control of a number of the elements of the process which fall to state governments. So they have their own timeframes that they apply. So we try and give the best estimate that we can. So I hope that's answered that question.
One from Kate within the chamber.
Thank you. I'm interested in the 2,000 square metres that might be green space above the car park, if that change is possible. And I'm wondering how that compares to the picture. I'm imagining that as, say, 100 metres by 20 metres or 50 by 40. Is the picture representative of how big that would be? How is it determined, and will it be big enough?
I would say the picture is reflecting something greater than 2,000 square metres. I think it was that strategy document initially came from a report from Architectus that was undertaken for us, and I think it incorporated both public open space and a communal area for residential development that occurred there. The 2,000 square metres is a minimum that we're proposing, and we would certainly be hoping for something that potentially was greater than that, and providing the maximum benefit to the community and to a public square that was possible.
Thank you.
The next question's from online. The increase in jobs is less than increase in population. Should they be closer?
I guess population includes people beyond just workers. It has students, it has a whole further gamut of people, retirees, etc. Well, population growth doesn't involve retirees, I guess, but
there are many different cohorts in the population increase, I suppose is what you're saying, Ian.
Yes.
And therefore the working population is just one of those cohorts. But also we're providing jobs for people who might not necessarily live in Willoughby. So we're providing a regional job centre in Chatswood and in St Leonard's for the part of the jobs target that falls to Willoughby Council in that strategic centre as well. So we're providing jobs for the metropolitan area, not necessarily for our own local government area.
And I think what we're seeking to do, aligning with the state government objectives, is creating a 30-minute city. So trying to provide jobs as close as possible to home, and if not, close to public transport that provides easy access from home to workplace.
Okay, the next one's from Stephen. What will happen to the apartments situated above the businesses on Sailors Bay Road when the proposed height changed to 17 metres? If another storey is to be built, will residents and tenants of that building be forced out?
We don't control the end development phase, and we're just proposing a scale of development that may be achievable into the future. I don't like to think of anyone being forced out of their home, although I do know that the state government has changed rules around strata in which if 75% of the strata owners agree, then it can proceed. So it doesn't require a unanimous decision in terms of owners corporation. I think that's getting into detail that's beyond the scope of the LEP and DCP, and we're looking at what future provision of housing and jobs within the centres, and it depends on both landowners, unit owners and developers as to the take up of that and how that occurs.
But as we made clear tonight, at the same time, it's development that we're supporting in Willoughby. We're also looking to increase the amount of affordable rental housing that will be available and controlled through the agent of council in perpetuity, the community housing provider for council. So I think that it's fair to say that council is very strong in terms of providing as much affordable housing as it can, and certainly, as Ian said, not wishing to see anybody lose their home as a result of development. But that is getting into the detail of a very end of development stage that is well beyond the conversation for tonight. Yes.
Okay, the next one's from Grant. The number of vacant ground floor commercial spaces in Northbridge indicates that currently there's an oversupply of affordable commercial space in Northbridge. However, there seems an assumption in the LEP for Northbridge Centre and Township that mixed development that yields even more commercial space will be occupied contrary to this evidence.
So,
well, yes, in terms of market swings and changes, we know that we're experiencing a downturn in the uptake of office space and retail space because of the COVID pandemic. So these market fluctuations are cyclical. We know that this happens from time to time, but we believe that it's important to preserve and create enough opportunities for local employment as we can in the planning we do for our local centres, to allow those opportunities for people to be able to walk to work and for jobs to be created for young people who live nearby. So without those opportunities, the land use could change to something such as a residential use on the ground floor, which is inappropriate for a high street and lost forever to the commercial market. So it's important that we plan for adequate, if not more than required, commercial floor space so that there's always an opportunity for local employment to be achieved.
I guess I would just add to that it is also looking to provide additional dwellings in the area, additional residents that will be looking for those additional services, and also that we're not limiting, or we're seeking not to limit as far as possible the use of those. So we're not specifying retail necessarily, we're not specifying commercial necessarily, it's non-residential uses that we're generally looking at. So that could be a range of other things, community facilities, schools, churches,
medical facilities,
medical facilities. So
thanks for that. The next question is from Helen. What of the previous proposal to close off Bellamy Street and where it joins Sailors Bay Road? Now, we have provided a link to the Have Your Say site for that one within the closed questions. Now, if anybody wants to pick up that link and go to the Have Your Say site, we'll send that through for us. I'm unable to get online, unfortunately. The next one is...
Our urban design specialist, Will Robertson, has been working with a team around Bellambi Street and streetscape improvements in Northbridge, which is a parallel process, if you like, not directly related to the LEP and DCP, but I know there's a bit of interest in that tonight. So if that link could be shared, Tanya, that would be very helpful.
Thank you. Yes, we'll send that through. So I've got the right one there now. The next one is the 10% requirement for affordable housing dedicated homes, or is it cash contribution?
So our the way our LEP is written is with a preference for it to be dedicated within the development, and that's really for a couple of reasons. It integrates within both home ownership and the affordable housing provision, but also it means the supply of affordable housing is brought on in a much more timely fashion. If it's a monetary contribution, it's dependent on council building that money pot up to then develop a site for affordable housing potentially. And so will take much longer for those affordable housing units to come on stream. So certainly we seek to have it delivered through within the site development. However, if there is less than a unit able to be achieved, for example, or there's a leftover amount beyond the floor space contribution required, then that is provided as a monetary contribution that is then built up, as mentioned.
Thanks, Ian. And at this stage, there's only one more question that we're answering live tonight that we don't need to respond when we get some time to answer specific details.
Yep.
This one's from Christine. What guarantee is there that the change of zoning to the car park will result in the 2,000 metre square open/green space for the community?
Well, it's certainly what this LEP and DCP is seeking to do, is set those provisions in place. So a development following on the basis of the change in controls would be requiring a minimum of 2,000 square metre open space provision. I guess it's also on the basis that at the moment, at least, council is in ownership of that and would be a party to the negotiations through that, you would expect.
And certainly any plans for that area, the whole reason why this is being exposed now in the draft LEP and DCP is to get community response to whether or not this is a good plan for the future for Northbridge. And we've been in close collaboration with the Progress Association on those negotiations and discussions. And we'd like to see the best outcome, as everybody would, for Northbridge going into the future. So it wouldn't be a reclassification for anything other than getting a really good outcome in terms of the place that is Northbridge Local Centre.
Okay,
So that's the last question, Tanya.
Yeah, that's right. We don't have any more.
That's fine, thank you. And if there are any more that come through, that we can always provide answers later. So the final slide for the evening then, as we've said earlier in the presentation, we're on exhibition now with the draft LEP and DCP until June the 7th, which will have been 12 weeks all up. And this whole series of webinars, of which, as I said, this is 6 of 12, is to provide the opportunity to get some locally specific detail. And Jane did a great job tonight, I think, giving us that very detailed synopsis of what the LEP and DCP hold for Northbridge. And the opportunity for questions for people when they're thinking about what their submissions might contain and how they might frame those up. So the feedback today and that received as a result of the webinar will be included in a feedback report. We're having a report prepared independently to then present to council around about October, as Ian said when you were asked the question on timing. So we'll go back to council with the submissions we've received and any suggestions for changes that might need to be made to the draft proposals in these documents now. And then if everything is straightforward, then we'll go straight to the Department of Planning and seek the new LEP to be made. And that could happen this year, an outside chance of that. But as we've already said, it's more likely there'll be another need for further exhibition. And we'll be working on the plan to finalise that next year with a view to finalising it maybe about the middle of the year. So that's really it from us tonight. I hope the information and the detail that's been provided tonight has been adequate and useful. And that's the intention, is to try and focus on particular areas in these webinars and give people that very local definition. So hopefully it's helped you in your thoughts about what your submission might contain, because we encourage you to make one. And certainly listen to other webinars as they come through, because we'll be delivering half a dozen more of these for different parts of the local government area. So thank you very much for your attendance tonight, and We wish you all a good evening and hear you at the next webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Just a reminder that the recording will be up by close of business tomorrow afternoon, along with the slide pack from the presentation from this evening. And in about 10 working days, we'll send out the questions and responses that weren't answered live out to all of the people that registered for this webinar tonight.
Perfect. Thanks, Tanya, for that.
Thank you.
And good night.